comfortable, you can read the 7 realities.
Yes, I will read.
Sure,
Jai
Jai
Baba. The 7 realities: existence, love, sacrifice, renunciation, knowledge, control, and surrender. I give no importance to creed, dogma, caste, or the performance of religious ceremonies and rites, but to the understanding of the following. The only real existence is that of the one and only God, who is the self in every finite self. The only real love is the love for this infinity God, which arouses an intense longing to see, know, and become one with its truth, God. The only real sacrifice is that in which, in pursuance of this love, all things, body, mind, position, welfare, and even life itself are sacrificed. The only real renunciation is that which abandons in the midst of worldly duties all selfish thoughts and desires. The only real knowledge is the knowledge that God is the inner dweller in good people and in so-called bad, in saint and in so-called sinner. This knowledge requires you to help all equally as circumstances demand, without expectation of reward. When compelled to take part in a dispute, to act without the slightest trace of enmity or hatred, to try to make others happy with brotherly or sisterly feeling for each one, and to harm no one in thought, word, or deed, not even those who harm you. The only real control is the discipline of the senses to abstain from indulgence in low desires, which alone ensures absolute purity of character. The only real surrender is that in which the poise is undisturbed by any adverse circumstance, and the individual amidst every kind of hardship is resigned with the perfect calm to the will of God. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
Thank you. So we're starting with part 2, chapter 1 of the book today. But then we'll start with a discussion that Mamaji started just as we were ending yesterday. And it's about the beloved God prayer. We bring that up. And I'll let him open the discussion in his own words, but it's about the 2 messages that are there in the prayer, right? One is about love, and one is about holding fast to Baba's Daman. Go ahead, Mama. So what was the discussion that you? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just bring my book.
It's actually open. I've shared it on the screen as well.
The prayer for Baba lovers, the prayer was dictated by Meher Baba in 1959. Okay. Beloved God, help us all to love you more and more and more and more and still yet more, till we become worthy of union with you. Okay. That is the 7th plane and above. And help us all to hold fast to Baba's Daman till the very end. So there are 2 aspects. One is loving God here, more and more and more. The other one is holding fast to Baba's Daman till the very end. So here Baba makes a clear distinction between beloved God and the avatar, Meher Baba. So what is the purport here? And help us all to hold fast to Baba's Daman till the very end. This help us all to hold fast to Baba's Daman till the very end is directed towards whom? To Meher Baba or God himself, beloved God. So the way the prayer is written, I don't clearly understand what is that Baba is telling us in two different ways here? Any inputs from the group?
Very interesting observation. Yeah, go ahead, Kama.
Okay, Jay Baba, I hope you can hear me in this train. But the way I look at it is that
Okay, it's
see, for
pretty bad.
example, the word beloved God. I think Mama comes up. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Go ahead, Kama.
Right.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
I think that the word beloved God is that real everything. Okay, the Parabrahma state or the Paramatma state, which we can't describe through words because unless you are in the seventh plane, you don't know what that God is, what we call as real everything. That is, as you rightly said, hold on to Baba's Daman till the very end. So, what is the difference between beloved God and Baba? And what is the similarity between beloved God and Baba? So, the similarity is that okay, let's see the difference. Beloved God is real everything, and Baba is the first drop soul who became God realized. So, technically speaking, before the first drop soul became God realized, that drop soul is just like any other drop soul like us. So, that first drop soul, after it got enlightened through the eternal avataric infinite consciousness from beings, it became designated as avatar, who is the only person who comes again and again, right, to to guide the humanity. And second is he is a representative of God. That is God. He is not God. He is God in human form. He is the one who represents. That is why here it says, hold on to Baba's Daman till the very end. The fact that it's difficult to visualize God in the formless aspect. So, how do we visualize God in form? So, God in human form is all the avatars, whether it is Rama, Krishna. Here, instead of Baba, you can put any of the avatars Rama, Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, or whatever. So, that is the aspect that you have to, that is my insight. That what is Baba telling us is that look, just like Buddha said, we are all walking Buddhas after we became enlightened. What happened to me can happen to Tom, Dick, and Harry. Before me, thousands of Buddhas. After me, thousands of Buddhas. So, similarly, what we are seeing out here is Baba and all the avatars are God in human form, the same drop soul who became enlightened first, and he is a representative of God, and he is similar to God because there is no difference between the drop soul, the water drop soul, and the ocean. So, that is the understanding that I have. The other aspect about love that you talked about, um, you know, when you read the chapter on love, the last two paragraphs in discourses, that this whole creation came out of love. So even if you look at our own being born, you can technically say we were also born out of love. You know, your parents made love and you were born. Like maybe you were an accident. That's a different aspect. So in love also there are different degrees where you see the starting with the fundamental love, which is with the forces of attraction in the mineral world. Then we go into the animal kingdom, animal love, then human love. Then in the involution state, we have pure love for the guru. And then in the seventh plane, when you reach Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you have divine love, which is basically you become one with God. So there is no difference between the drop soul, Jivatma or Manavatma, and the Paramatma. So this is the whole journey. Jai Baba.
Here, what I wanted to know was The first line says, "Beloved God, and you are asked to love the God." And the holding on to Baba's Daman. What is the purport of saying holding on to Daman? How I see is Daman means all the messages, all the instructions, all the enlightening, say, write-ups are available from Baba, which we have to hold on to. It is not just the picture of Baba that we hold on to. It is the message that we get from Baba, which is already there for us to hold on to. That's how I look at it. And here there is no word about loving Baba. So how do we put it together?
I think
Jai
the
Baba,
secret,
what
yeah,
see what I
go
can
ahead.
say is that your question is right. When you're looking at it from a pure Bhakti Yoga aspect, you don't need any messages. You just surrender to whatever is happening. Okay.
Yes.
And the point here is that when it says, "Beloved God, help us all to," hold on one second, please. "Beloved God, help us all to love you more and more." When you use the word, I use the word your the oil spot, innermost loving self. He's addressing your innermost loving self. Because if you start looking at Baba, beloved God, as separate from yourself, then you're caught up in duality. Because this whole business is, you can call it love, or you can call it getting over duality, because this is a game of duality. When you already know that you and the oversoul are not different. Okay, so Baba's Daman till the very end, the messages you are talking about is for Jnana yogis, people who want to dissect and understand the divine knowledge, and in the process surrender to Baba. So yes, Baba's Daman can be interpreted in many different ways. So there are many different ways to approach God through different yogas: Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Raja Yoga, and so on. So that is my interpretation. Jai Baba. So in fact, the Parvartikar prayer, when Baba says, "You are in the firmament, you are in the depths," he could have easily said, "I am in the firmament and in the depths," because Baba is already God, right? God in human form. But he says, "You." So he's addressing each individual drop soul as oils. Your innermost loving self is in the firmament, in the depths, and so on. Jai Baba.
Thank you.
Good
Any other
Yeah, Jai Baba.
inputs?
yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
Sanjay.
I think holding on to Daman, Baba has given the like a child hold on to the Daman of her mother. Complete surrenderance and trust in him. Just hold on to him without listening to the noise around. That's what, in a simple way, I understand. Just follow him. Follow him. That's it. Yeah.
So follow him means what? What to follow? His messages.
Yeah, yeah. That's what.
Yes.
Yeah. Surrenderance, and trust. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Jai Baba.
Thank you.
I think also fact that the message was targeted at. I think I agree with all everybody said till now. I just wanted to add one thing, which is the message is targeted not at the whole of creation. The message is targeted specifically at Baba lovers who are, firstly, what is definition of Baba lover? Baba is already defined. Okay, so we'll have to see it in that context. Second, we have to see the fact that Baba in this message, especially the second part, foresees the risk that Baba lovers run, which is the constant allure of Maya, which will ensure that your conviction can be weakened. And Baba gives so much of importance to retaining that contact and conviction to those who have become Baba lovers is what I'm taking away from this, right? Obviously, with
Yes.
the what should you say? Yeah, I think it's just the action of the power and action of Maya, which will try to weaken your conviction, and probably Baba foresees that even amongst the Baba lovers and tries to help by saying, hey, keep this in mind, say this every day, and just hold on to my EAIC and go your way. Make your progress to the journey. Make your progress on the journey.
Thank you. Little lot more clarity on the different ideas.
Yeah, thank
So
you for the thought-provoking question, thought-provoking discussion, because that was what made us think about it, right? So again, this is exactly what Baba wants us to do. Not do anything for the sake of doing, but think and analyze and understand and internalize. And I think in our journey of the last 2 years, we are also slowly getting better at internalizing. Some more than us. Thank you, Baba. And
thank you.
and then let's go to so as I said, the way this book is structured, for those of you who remember, the first one is just an account. It's a personal account of what he sees, again written by Don Stevens. So we finished the first part. Now we are going to the second part, which is about Baba's messages about life and the path. The last one is about the avatar, right? So now we finished first part. We're starting with second part, which is life and the path. In that, we take up the first chapter today. So on the physical book, it is page 93, and the chapter is Death and Immortality. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. I start reading. My screen is visible, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The immersion of the individual in the routing of life causes him to be seriously disturbed by the sudden experience of death, particularly when it takes away someone who has been near and dear to him. When the sight of death becomes too frequent, as in time of war or during an epidemic, the individual's mind tends to protect itself by retiring within a shell of habit and routine. Familiar actions, faces, and surroundings, which require no thought or adjustment, become at times a buttress to his emotional balance. But even this wall of cultivated indifference crumbles when the hand of death snatches away someone who has entered deeply into his inner life, someone who perhaps acted as a pivotal point upon which his emotions turned. At such a time, his unquestioning attitude towards life is disturbed, and his mind becomes deeply preoccupied with an intensive search for lasting values. The life of each person is deeply enmeshed in this mystery of death. But it is a mystery which accents thought instead of dulling it. For if anything makes a man think intensely about the true nature of life, it is the recurrent theme of death. As the tale of life is told, it pauses frequently to contemplate the gaping holes left by death. There is no way to avoid the thought-provoking impact of that inescapable presence. Although none escapes the intensive search for the hidden secret to the meaning of death, few can lift the veil and unravel the mystery. For most, it remains a soul-searing enigma which causes deep restlessness. For some, it offers a wide field for imaginative speculation. For the few, it yields its secret. Many refuse to accept death as the simple, final extinction of the individual. But this reaction is more often a form of unreasoned wish than a matter of unshakable conviction. Even so, this instinctive rebellion should not be lightly dismissed, for much of the vigor of this blind protest against the seeming fact of death springs from an obscure but still functioning intuition. However, this intuitive reaction does not approach the more secure position achieved through reasoned belief based on faith in the authority of a seer or on the direct perception of those who know. So it's both flowery language and it's dense in some parts. So if you want me to pause and take a break, we can. But I think he's basically talking about death being the point of reflection, point of initiation of the journey, and the death of a near one often is the trigger. And I think this is a theme that's set even in discourses, with the vairagya being setting in at the loss of a loved one. And obviously, as you go deep into the theme of death, that's the beginning of the fact that we try to get to another idea which Baba keeps referring to, and that is the idea of lasting values. So we go to values that are real and lasting, and you get to that because you realize that the values that you associate to death are not as lasting and real as we think it is, and then we go from there. Anything else before we continue?
Jai Baba, Karthik.
Jai Baba, Ashram.
Yeah, so what comes to my mind is supplement 19 of God Speaks, which also can be read with this. I think it's page 238 of God Speaks in the hard copy.
Correct.
It talks
So
about,
I think we can death and yeah, go ahead.
It talks about real birth and real death, and that's
Real
very profound and significant.
Sure. So maybe we can read it after we finish this, and I think we've read it in the past as well. So
Yes.
we'll get to it once we are done with this chapter. Right?
Regarding the last sentence that you read, based on the faith in the authority of a seer or on direct perception of those who know. So what is the second one? Who are they?
A realized one that probably is in our contact or is in touch with us, who can tell us, but we may not have the conviction and serious conviction to take it at face value, is what I'm saying. But how is it different from the first one? Reasoned belief based on faith in the authority of a seer.
So there is no reasoning, but here direct perception of those who know. Somehow I am unable to make out what is said here.
The difference, yeah.
Yes.
Jai Baba, I think that it's talking about even normal individuals like us who understand the concept of death, and that we understand that, as Baba said, the difference between death and daily life is every day you go to sleep and you get up with the same body, and after death you come with a new body. So once we understand this whole cycle of reincarnation and karma and birth and rebirth, so that's what I feel he's talking about. Jai Baba.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Jai Baba, does the authority of a seer refer to Baba?
Yes, all the perfect masters, avatars are brought together there, I think.
Correct.
The seer can also be anybody on the higher planes who understand
Higher planes
these
not
aspects.
necessarily be a perfect master. Yes. So
Thanks.
Okay, go ahead.
okay, I continue. When a sensitive individual is first faced by a death of deep significance in his circle of close friends, He is usually struck by the transitory nature of all forms of life. Confronted by the undeniable impermanence of the body, yet unfortified by knowledge of some sustaining permanent principle, he often falls into a mood of deep despair or supercilious cynicism. If life is inexorably doomed to extinction, he reasons, there can be little meaning in the frantic efforts to achieve. In turn, this thought leaves him in a vacuum of purpose, which may lead him either to a state of supine inaction or may precipitate him into reckless rebellion. To him, existence seems to be conditional, intermittent, and vanishing, while extinction appears to be unqualified, inescapable, and permanent. When such a grim conclusion has been reached, whether consciously or unconsciously, the individual is tempted to rain death and destruction upon others or to invite it upon himself, merely because death appears to be more lasting than life. The recklessly destructive desperado and the determined suicide belong to this type. They cannot accept life as having any real value because their initial unthinking faith in the value of life has been uprooted by the rude shock of death. If death is accepted as real and longer in duration than life, then life is degraded below meaninglessness. Even then, such values in life as truth, beauty, goodness, and love can claim some intrinsic worth despite their fleeting existence. But in practical fact, all keenness for the pursuit of even these momentary values is gradually replaced by a sense of hopeless apathy. For one hears constantly a background whisper which says that they too are doomed to vanish one day. If the cat, while stealthily drinking milk, knows that someone is waiting outside their door with a club, she can hardly relish the flavor of her surreptitious meal. Similarly, a man who comes to know that all his achievements must soon be brought to naught can hardly have his heart in his efforts. If he stops to reflect that all the people he loves are earmarked for early conversion to dust, then his spontaneous enthusiasm gradually dries up and he is forced to consider what he is striving for. If he tries to cling to those loved ones despite his new awareness, all the desperateness of his ensuing efforts become only a sacrifice to vanity. In order to avoid the pain which he is bound to feel at the inevitable loss of his dear ones, he may try to avoid life by adopting the viewpoint that the living are no more than on a par with the dead. The success of such a game depends upon an exact equation. For if he holds the slightest preference for the living, he will be gravely affected when the living become the dead. He is forced finally to face the fact that if death means the extinguishing of his beloved brothers in a blind vacuum of eternity, then the entire game of life is a meaningless tragedy. All courage, sacrifice, and loyalty to ideals become a farce, and all vital seeking takes on that cast of empty endeavor, of much effort without purpose. Fear of loss treads closely upon all earnest attempts to appropriate and inherit the significance of life, depriving it of all sweetness. In short, if death is looked upon as mere extinction, man tends to lose his balance and is plunged into perpetual gloom. All his dreams of the enduring reality of truth, beauty, and love are refuted and seen by hindsight to have been a blind groping after illusion. His previous ideal of eternity and inexhaustible sweetness, instead of filling him with hope and enthusiasm, now reproaches him with the utter senselessness of all earthly values. Thus, death, when not understood, vitiates the whole of life, and the first impulsive answer of inaction or cynicism, which the individual usually forges to meet the question, strands him in a thoroughly desiccated universe of unrelieved weariness. Nevertheless, this gradually prepares him for another attempt to find a more vital answer to the inescapable query. The human mind cannot endure such a stalemate for long, as there is an internal force which insists that the inner nature be in motion. Eventually, the pressure for such motion breaks through the rigidity of such a negative concept of death. A great flood of new interrogation and discovery often breaks out, and in it, the key question now posed by death becomes, what is life? The answers supplied are countless and depend upon the passing moods which spring from the deeply rooted ignorance of the interrogator. The first instinctive answer is, life is that which is terminated by death. The answer is still completely inadequate, as it involves no positive principle on which a fruitful life can be based, nor can the individual's need for development be met. Such an answer explains neither death nor life. The individual is driven to try to understand life and death along new lines. Instead of looking upon death as the opposite of life, he now inevitably comes to look upon it as the handmaiden of life. He begins to affirm intuitively the reality and eternality of life. Instead of interpreting life in terms of death, man seeks to interpret death in terms of life. Slowly, event by event, he learns to take life again in all earnestness with a deeper, affirming consciousness. As he does so, he is able to give a more constructive response to the recurring sight of death. The challenge of death is now not only accepted and absorbed by life, but is met by a counter challenge. What is death? It is now death's turn to submit itself to critical scrutiny. The most unsophisticated answer to this counter question is, death is only an incident in life. This simple and profoundly true declaration, the unendurable chaos precipitated by regarding death as the extinction of life. There's a missing word there. I'll read that sentence again. This simple and profoundly true declaration, the unendurable chaos, I think there's a missing conjunction there. This simple and profoundly true declaration dash the unendurable chaos precipitated by regarding death as the extinction of life. Soon, it is clearly seen that it is futile to try to understand death without first understanding life. As consciousness gradually settles into this balanced approach to the problem, it takes on a healthy tone which makes it receptive to the truth concerning both life and death. Direct, undimmed knowledge of such truth is available only to spiritually advanced souls. The seers of all time have had direct access to the truth about life and death, and they have repeatedly given a suffering and groping humanity useful information on this point. Their explanations are important because they protect man's mind from erroneous and harmful attitudes toward life and death, and prepare him for perception of the truth. Although direct knowledge of truth requires considerable spiritual perception, nevertheless, even correct intellectual understanding of the relationships of life and death plays an important part in restoring mankind to a healthy outlook. Above incarnate life in birth and beyond disincarnate life after death, the soul is one indivisible eternal existence. The gestation of individualization of the soul begins with the evolution of its consciousness. Consciousness begins to evolve in incarnate life, and its evolution becomes complete only in incarnate life. Simultaneously with the evolution of consciousness through the evolution of forms, that is bodies, sanskaras begin to accumulate. The evolution of form and consciousness, and with it the individualization of the human ego mind, is complete when the soul attains the human soul for the first time. But because of the accumulated sanskaras, the fully evolved consciousness of the soul remains entrapped in illusion and therefore is not directed towards the soul's self-realization, also known as God realization. And let's just quickly read the footnote on sanskaras. Sanskaras are the habit patterns. Sanskaras are the habit patterns and the unconscious motivations remaining from previous actions in this and in past lives. They are the propelling forces which so largely determine the actions of the individual and leave him so little opportunity for positive action aimed at progressive understanding and development of his own nature. It's a fantastic definition. I'm going to read this again. Sanskaras are the habit patterns and the unconscious motivations remaining from previous actions in this and in past lives. Keywords: habit patterns, unconscious motivations, and remaining from. So all are keywords. Next slide. They are the propelling forces. Again, that's what is making your action. That's what makes your behavior. That's what defines your attitude. They are the propelling forces which so largely determine the actions of the individual and leave him so little opportunity for positive action aimed at progressive understanding and development of his own nature. I think even discourses does not have such a good definition of sanskaras. I mean, and as we all agree in this group, sanskaras are going to become one of the biggest words in this avataric advent, if not already the case.
And here,
Did I hear
the
something?
word positive action,
Yeah.
from what all you have put in Trello and all that, action, positive action, and all that. So that comes to mind.
Yes.
So what is the action which does not attract sanskara, further sanskara? Positive action aimed at progressive understanding and development of his own nature. That
So
is
we know now
response
that
and not
positive
reaction.
action. Exactly. So in the way we understand, we as students of Baba's literature, as we understand positive action in this para, we also know that some positive action is inaction.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah. So positive action is basically any action that gets you towards, again, that's also answered, progressive understanding and development of his own nature. Right.
One word.
Jay Baba,
Karthik,
positive action can also be looked as the intelligent action and unintelligent action aspects.
yes, yes.
The
Absolutely.
conscious
It's
intelligent action. Yeah.
That's
exactly.
what I was alluding to. So what we have made a PPT also on that, and then how we classified.
Correct.
So it brings to that.
Absolutely.
Karthik, another point is the PDF you are reading is slightly very, very small. What I have downloaded is very clear. That word was terminated, which you are not able to put up.
So,
So
okay.
I feel you can check for another
Version.
download for this book, I think.
Thank you. So maybe you can send that to me when you get a chance, and I'll start using that from the next read. Thank you. Maybe it's just an edition mistake, or I don't know where I got it. So thank you very much for pointing that. Okay. So any other points, or we can continue? Okay. Let me continue. For self-realization, all sanskaras must be completely wiped out to enable the soul as the individualized ego to be transmuted into the individualized soul in the conscious state of God. Further, the sanskaras that begin to accumulate in an incarnate life have to be wiped out in an incarnate life. In order to be wiped out in toto, sanskaras must be annulled or cancelled through the process of exact equalization or perfect qualitative and quantitative balancing of all opposite sanskaras, whether good or bad. This is extremely difficult, for the sanskaras have a natural tendency towards preponderance of one opposite over the other. While unbalance of the opposite sanskaras reaches its maximum in an incarnate life, near balancing is achieved after death during a period of discarnate life through the intensive subjective pleasure or suffering in the states known as heaven and hell. Each incarnate life is an opportunity for the realization of one's true self. Each death or discarnate life is an opportunity for achieving a semblance of balance to start another birth with its further chance at self-realization. If the opportunity were fully taken, one incarnate life could be sufficient to make the individual realize this goal, but it is well nigh impossible to attain the initiative and longing to do so without getting involved in the illusory maze of innumerable opposite experiences. The contact of a perfect master is invaluable in calling a halt to the dizzy gyrations of incarnate and discarnate lives in illusion, and awakening the individual to the real knowledge of self. From the psychological point of view, death entails no slightest curtailment of individual existence. This does not mean that the surviving mind remains unaffected by the kind of death which severed the individual from the body. Both the condition of the mind as well as its capability to progress further in the life after death are often substantially determined by the conditions surrounding the death. From the standpoint of its psychic after effects, death can be classified into three broad types: abnormal and supernormal. Normal death follows an illness which ultimately renders the physiological functioning of the body impossible. Generally, it involves some kind of warning to the individual for if the illness is severe, he often anticipates that death is at hand. Although by no means true of all deaths caused by illness, when the individual has some anticipation of impending death, he usually has a chance to tie up loose ends and prepare his mind for this new crisis. The second, or abnormal type of death, is that which results from accidents, murder, war, and suicide. In accidents and murder, there is generally no anticipation of impending death. Being unexpected, death involves, in such instances, a shock which can shatter the very roots of the sanskaras, seeking expression through the physical incarnation of the individual. In unanticipated accidental death, the ordinary ego mind has a moderate tendency to gravitate towards the gross sphere and cling to it because of the ego mind's attachment to the gross world. In anticipated abnormal death, when resulting from murder or war, the ego mind can become bound to the gross world by the chains of unfulfilled revenge. There is less tendency for such binding to occur in death due to war than in that resulting from murder. In war, the combatants on both sides are often impersonal in their actions and aware that they are fighting for some cause rather than through personal enmity. If this awareness is clear and steady, death in war does not yield the mental reaction of revenge. Among abnormal kinds of death, suicide deserves special attention. Suicide may be divided into 4 grades: 1, lowest; 2, low; 3, high; and 4, highest. The lowest type is the last measure in escaping punishment or ignominy or utter frustration after the individual has tried unscrupulously to satisfy his own selfish desires. Thus, one who has committed murder for lust or power may commit suicide when he is caught. Even after leaving the body, such a person does not succeed in severing his link with the gross world for hundreds of years. These individuals live literally as ghosts in the semi-subtle sphere, which lies between the gross and subtle world. They experience agonizing suffering because of their unfulfilled desires. Due to the link which they preserve with the gross world, they continue to desire various gross objects keenly, a desire which can never be fulfilled. This suffering is even more acute than the intense sufferings in the hell state that the individual experiences after he severs his connection with the gross world. A somewhat less acute class of suffering in imagination is experienced in the hell state by suicides who have been slightly better motivated, but who are still classified as low. In this, group are those motivated by sheer disgust with life. Does a person suffering from bad health, or stricken by a loathsome disease, or one who is poverty stricken and ashamed of being a burden on others, might put an end to his life through the lack of will to live? Since the cause of such a suicide is revulsion from earthly life, the ego mind does not continue to maintain any enduring link with the gross world beyond the normal 3 or 4 days following death. After that normal period, the link is snapped, and the ego mind then begins to experience the intense suffering of its bad sanskaras, usually termed the hell state. A footnote on hell state. Neither hell nor heaven should be regarded as places. They are mental states and imaginary in the same sense that the world of duality also exists in the realm of illusion.
Regarding the hell and heaven state, one insight that I got from reading this is that there is a purpose in that state. So the soul, with its ego still attached to it, can say, look at what all has happened and try to learn a lesson so that the next birth can be better off. If we take this as just an experience to either enjoy or suffer, it is not correct, I think. Hey, Baba.
Perfect. It is a wasted opportunity, and intense review or retrospective review of the previous birth is a point in time where that individualized soul can determine and define what it wants to do after the learnings it has received in that particular birth. So, as your advancement in your spiritual journey is higher, I would presume that your decisions for the next birth and your learnings would qualitatively be better. So, as you are in the earlier stages of advancement, your nature would be to just say, okay, now I just want to experience the next opposite. I just want to get on with that experience which I did not get in this, and so on and so forth. And your ability to reflect and look at the big picture and try to make a move which helps you move closer to emancipation is less likely in the early stages.
Yes.
Yeah, but good point, which is basically you're pointing out the reason for the heaven and hell, or the purpose, or the
Purpose. Yes.
Yeah, purpose. Yeah. Okay, so let's go on to the next page. So we covered low, and we covered lowest, which is high link to, both are frustrated, but the lowest is high link to gross world, and low is frustration, but a low link to, or lesser link to gross world. So the low escapes being banished for hundreds, and I'm shocked at reading that number. So it's hundreds of years, literally, that you can be hanging around trying to get an experience which you can't. You're basically trying to get an experience which is only available in the gross form. Unfortunately, you're not in the gross form, and you're just stuck waiting for it. And if you're in that lowest level, it can just be a wasted opportunity for hundreds of years, which is shocking and scary.
That is also one of the reasons to say that ghosts experience the gross experience through another body, through the that is the reason. That's why they go to a gross body to experience.
Yes, correct. So I continue. Although a ghost caught in the semi-subtle sphere suffers even more acutely than does the ego mind experiencing the hell state, The latter achieves.
Karthik, did
Yeah, go
you
ahead.
read the last two paragraphs of the previous page?
I thought I did, no?
Okay, I don't know.
No, hold on. Lowest type is the last
Okay.
measure, the health state.
Because the
And then
asterisk was above.
yes. Yeah. So only when I scrolled after finishing this second
Yes,
para did I remember the asterisk. So I did not come to the asterisk from here.
Okay.
I came only when I scrolled. If you want, I'll read it again because the last two paragraphs talk about the low category. Yeah, low category. Let me read it. A somewhat less acute class of suffering in imagination is experienced in the hell state by suicides who have been slightly better motivated, but who are still classified as low. In this group are those motivated by sheer disgust with life. Thus, a person suffering from bad health, or stricken by a loathsome disease, or one who is poverty stricken and ashamed of being a burden on others, might put an end to his life through the lack of will to live. Since the cause of such a suicide is revulsion from earthly life, the ego mind does not continue to maintain any enduring link with the gross world beyond the normal 3 or 4 days following death. After that normal period, the link is snapped, and the ego mind then begins to experience the intense suffering of its bad sanskaras, usually termed the hell state. Although a ghost caught in the semi-subtle sphere suffers even more acutely than does the ego mind, experiencing the hell state, the latter achieves some exhaustion of evil sanskaras, while the former does not. Further, the sufferings of the ghosts who maintain their link with earthly life are more tantalizing because the link constantly holds before them the prospect of fulfillment of gross desires without actual means for their satisfaction. The general belief that suicide is bad is due to the fact that it is usually the result of low motives or a cowardly attitude towards life. When suicide is employed as an escape from dilemmas brought on by failure to cope with the needs of life, it is not only ignoble but far reaching as well in its demoralizing effects upon the victim. The third or high type of suicide is in no way rooted in inferior motives and is therefore free of their deteriorating effects. It is inspired by altruistic motives alone and is a sacrifice made to secure the material or spiritual well being of others. One who meets death through, example, a hunger strike in order to better the welfare of the masses is a suicide of this high type. The motives of such a suicide are not far from different from those of martyrs who lay down their lives on the battlefield for country, society, or religion. The total absence of base motives in this high type of suicide makes it entirely different from the lower grades. As in other noble acts of self-effacement, such highly motivated action entitles the departed individual to the privileges and pleasures of the heavenly state and also constitutes a definite asset in his spiritual ongoing. A suicide inspired by ordinary altruistic motives is not the highest type. The fourth or highest class results from intense desire to see God or to unite with Him. This is an extremely rare occurrence. In most cases in which suicide is believed to have been committed for the sake of God, there is an admixture of other motivating factors, such as dissatisfaction with the conditions of earthly life. If and when suicide is embraced purely for the sake of attaining God, it can have the effect of achieving liberation or mukti. The masters have always warned aspirants against resorting to suicide in the intensity of their longing for union with God, for there is too great room for self-deception and inadvertent admixture of inferior unconscious motivation. Regardless of the abnormality of the circumstances which may lie back of it, no type of death can really damn the individual forever. It is never more than an incident in his long spiritual journey. The third or supernormal type of death consists in leaving the body voluntarily. This is done by the advanced yogis who wind up their earthly careers after fulfilling their mission, much as the student locks up his textbooks after passing his examination. The supernormal or voluntary death of the advanced yogi is definitely anticipated and willed, but is entirely different from suicide insofar as motives, results, and manner of leaving the body are concerned. Friends and relatives of a departed one often are seriously upset by his death, because dissolution of the form may seem to them to be the extinction of life itself. All of their attachments had been related to the form. It was because of the form that they had contact with the soul, and it was through the form that their various physical and emotional needs were fulfilled. The disappearance of the body that had acted as the vehicle of the soul is therefore often interpreted by them as the annihilation of the individual himself. From the purely physical point of view, death does not involve annihilation of even the body, but physiologically it has become unfit to be the continued dwelling place of the spirit, and has therefore lost all importance. From the point of view of the individualized soul as mind, death does not involve any loss whatsoever, as the mind and all its sanskaras remain intact. The individual, in essence, is thus in no way different. He has only cast off his external coat. Nevertheless, this severance from the physical body is fraught with two important consequences. It is a means of introducing the individual to a new type of existence, and it is also in itself an incident of the utmost importance because of side effects of the greatest practical consequence. When others die, the individual loses only one or at most a few friends who have played an important role in his earthly existence. But when he dies, he loses at one stroke all the persons who had entered intimately into his own life. He also loses all his possessions and is broken away from the achievements on which he had built the very foundation of his sense of accomplishment in life. As the crowning touch, he must also leave behind the very physical body with which he had identified himself so completely that he was rarely capable of imagining himself as anything but that physical body. This complete annihilation of the entire structure of the individual's earthly existence is therefore a crisis without parallel in his life. This critical turning point, which occurs at death, is attended by both advantages and disadvantages. The greatest disadvantage lies in the fact that the individual must leave incomplete all the undertakings of his earthly life. He must leave the entire chessboard without taking any further interest in it. The seal of his life is blotted out, and the chain of his mundane interests is hacked apart. From the standpoint of objective achievement, the continuity of his undertaking has undergone an abrupt break. advancement of the projects he has left behind must come from his previous associates and can no longer be his concern. It is rare for the individual to be drawn back through a sanskaric linking to the individual task which he had begun in a past incarnation to develop it on from the point where his successors had left it. It would be a mistake to think that death brings nothing but disadvantages. Death also brings about a general weakening of attachments by shattering all the sanskaras which were fed by the earthly objects, because the mind is now torn away from them. While it is true that many of the sadhanas undertaken by the individual during earthly life have the effect of unwinding previous sanskaras, still it is only in extremely rare instances that he succeeds in completely erasing the present and future effects of these sanskaras. This erasure is effected within certain well-defined limits by the sudden transplanting of the individual that occurs at death. I just read about sadhanas. Devotional and disciplinary practices. That's what he defines sadhanas as. Last para on this page. If the lessons inherent in a single death were to be thoroughly assimilated by the individual, he would benefit by the equivalent of several lifetimes of patient spiritual effort. Unfortunately, this does not happen in most cases because after death, the individual usually rises to revive his accumulated sanskaras. Through these revived sanskaras, he recaptures the experiences through which he has already lived. The period immediately following death usually becomes, therefore, an occasion for the repetition of all that has previously been lived through, rather than a period of emancipation through understanding all that has been lived out. Regardless of these shortcomings, death does give a severe shaking to the tree of sanskaras, root, trunk, and branch. And this impels the mind to revise its attitude towards the objective universe. Death also facilitates a certain amount of disentanglement from the attractive world of form. The individual is never able to go back to earth without some modification of his approach to life. This is the key line. The individual is never able to go back to earth without some modification of his approach to life. So that's in the heaven and hell reflection and the planning for his next life. And I continue. Life in a new physical body must conform to lines determined by the individual sanskaras. Thus, there is often a close resemblance to the past life on earth, but it is not a literal repetition of the past. It is a new experiment. This readjustment of outlook, which is facilitated by the abrupt reorientation involved in death, is particularly helpful when it occurs after spiritual aspiration has been awakened in the individual. In such cases, the loosening of all attachment which occurs at death is very conducive to the further flowering of spiritual aspiration. The aspirant now has a chance, under fresh circumstances, to remodel the entire pattern of his life in line with his spiritual aspirations. Because of these special opportunities which death offers, the aspirant does not regret his own death. For him, death is not a cloud without its silver lining. The perfect master Jalaluddin Rumi has said that he always progressed through frequent deaths. But this cannot justify anyone, and even less a spiritual aspirant, in seeking death for its own sake. To seek death in this manner is to put a false premium upon it. Such seeking of death springs from fear of life and from failure to cope with it, and inevitably must defeat its own purpose. If death has any value, it is to teach the individual the true art of life. It would be wrong for the aspirant to seek death with the hope of making further progress thereby. On the other hand, he should not fear death when it overtakes him. A true aspirant neither seeks death nor fears it, and when death comes to him, he converts it into a stepping stone to the higher life. Some people are particularly afraid of the exact moment of death because they anticipate unbearable pain at that instant. In reality, all physical suffering experienced during illness or just before death terminates at the moment of death. The process of the actual dropping of the body is quite painless, contrary to the superstition that a person experiences indescribable agonies in death. However, the severing of the individual's emotional entanglement in the gross world is not found to be easy. The various religious rites observed after a death have primarily the purpose of helping the departing individual disentangle himself from these ties. For instance, the repetition of the name of God or of scriptures, often practiced after the death of a person, has a wholesome effect both on those who have been left behind as well as the one who has passed away, because they help to free both parties of their mutual sanskaric attachment to form. On the other hand, the lamentation and wailing that is often observed has a degrading and depressing effect both on those left behind as well as the person who has passed away, for it tends to strengthen mutual attachment to form. The thought or wish the dying individual holds at the moment of death has special importance in determining his future destiny. If the last thought is of God or the Master, the individual achieves liberation. It is quite common for an individual not to have any specific thought at the moment of death. Even if he has had thoughts or wishes before death, he will tend to forget them at the time of death. At that moment, some people hope they may not return to earthly life, but they are not exempted from rebirth by merely wishing. They are reborn, but exhibit a pronounced disgust for life and tend to lead the lives of ascetics or recluses. If the good and evil sanskaras of the individual are almost balanced at the time of death, he may take on a new physical body almost immediately. We'll just see what good is explained as in the footnote. Good, in quotes, actions leave sanskaric residues in the individual's subconscious as surely as do bad, in quotes, actions. Therefore, the individual may be bound just as surely by the golden chains forged by good actions as by the iron chains of bad actions. So all of this is very relevant to what Khalid has anyway put out as a message, and also the response from Sherry on the group, summarizing that. And then Sherry makes a reference to sin, which I think we have to see in the larger context of Baba's idea of, in fact, he rarely uses the word sin, right? Sin or virtue is used, but not as frequently as one would expect in a book of spirituality. Because again, on the foundational concept of Baba about values, where he associates very little to goodness and badness, as he says both are gradations. So I'll continue from that para from the beginning. If the good and evil sanskaras of the individual are almost balanced at the time of death, he may take on a new physical body almost immediately. He may even enter a new incarnation as early as the 4th day after death. In such urgent cases of rebirth, the individual can enliven a ready fetus anytime between the 6th and 7th month of embryological development. It is important to note that both father and mother give only prana or vital energy to the fetus. In addition to receiving prana, it must be enlivened by some individualized soul. Ordinarily, this takes place during the later stages of embryological development. When the individual is ready for reincarnation, he is automatically drawn to his future parents by sanskaric links. The parents act as a magnet due to their previous connections with the reincarnating individual. Occasionally, the strongest sanskaric or karmic link which the reincarnating individual has with incarnate individuals is not with the parents, but with a brother or sister. It is this link, then, that determines the family in which he takes birth. In times of emergency, as in wars or epidemics, when thousands of individuals may seek immediate reincarnation, it is not always possible for all to be born into families having strong previous links with them. But if the sanskaric status of the individual is precipitating him towards incarnation, his taking on of a body is not postponed merely because parents are not available to provide a suitable previous link. It is possible through the intervention of the masters to make infinite adjustments through mutual exchanges. Death is like throwing away clothes which have become useless through wear and tear. Just as a traveler may stop at different places and at each halt may change clothes according to his needs, so the individual goes on changing his bodies according to the needs of his sanskaras. Death may also be compared to sleep. When a man goes to sleep, he wakes up in the same physical body. When he drops his physical body at death, he wakes up in another physical body. For most persons, the period between death and birth is one of absorption in subjectivity. As mentioned before, after death, the ego mind of the individual normally retains its tie with the remnants of the physical body for 3 or 4 days. After this period, the connection is completely severed, and the individual then exists entirely in the subjectivity of his mental states. The subjective phase is brought about by the resurrection of all the sanskaras in which the ego mind has brought along with it after death. The sudden transplanting of the ego mind from one sphere to another does wear out the scars of the sanskaras to some extent, but for the greater part, they remain intact. If death had resulted in the complete wiping out of all the sanskaric scars on the mind, it would have resulted in emancipation of the individual from all limitation. But this does not happen. Not only are the sanskaric imprints retained after death, but they may unroll unhampered in the life after death. As the sanskaric sheet is unwound, the individual experiences in the hell or heaven state both the sufferings or pleasures embodied in the bad or good sanskaras. Every individual has both classes in his store, and his mental state in the life after death is determined by which one of these preponderates. The intensity of the sufferings or pleasures which the individual experiences through these revived sanskaras is so great that a greater exhaustion of these sanskaras is brought about during a relatively short period than is possible in hundreds of years of suffering or pleasure in the earthly life. It is these posthumous mental states of intense suffering and pleasure which are respectively known in religious literature as hell and heaven. A popular belief, they are incorrectly regarded as places or spheres. It is more appropriate to speak of a hell state or heaven state rather than places. When there is a preponderance of evil sanskaras at death, the individual gradually exhausts the bad sanskaras through suffering in the hell state. The result is that the evil sanskaras eventually tend to strike a balance with the good sanskaras. It is as if a huge block of ice were placed on one pan of a balance, causing it to sink because of its excess over a smaller weight contained in the counterbalance pan. As the great block of ice is gradually melted and the water spills, there is a tendency for the two pans to come out into balance. Similarly, as the mass of evil sanskaras become attenuated through suffering, their preponderance begins to vanish and they almost come into balance with the good sanskaras. This moment, when the two opposite types of sanskaras are almost in a state of balance, is the moment when the afterlife of the individual terminates and he finds himself precipitating into a new physical incarnation on earth. He is precipitated into a new physical body because no further purpose is served by continuation of his subjective absorption in the discarnate life. He is right to accumulate fresh experience in another gross body. And for this purpose, he must adopt a vehicle which is suitable for the working out of his unexhausted sanskaras. If the individual soul has been exhausting an excess of evil sanskaras and has therefore been undergoing a hell state, he may jump into a new incarnation in which good sanskaras tend to dominate. The cause of this unexpected reversal is to be found in the strength of the flow of the sanskaric currents. At the time he incarnates, the individual has already been relieved of the excess of his evil sanskaras and the strong ride of his good sanskaras, which is about to predominate. Consequently, it is the vigorous current of the good sanskaras which motivates him in his new incarnation. Thus, a man who has been a profligate in his last life might begin his new incarnation with a marked inclination towards asceticism. Conversely, a swing can occur from good to bad when one jumps into an incarnation from a heaven state in which the preponderance of good sanskaras had been exhausted through intense imaginative pleasure. The moment of incarnation into a new physical body is precipitated when the good and bad sanskaras have almost balanced each other and the tide of bad sanskaras is about to predominate. A changeover at incarnation from good to bad or from bad to good should not be taken as a universal law. A reversal of individual nature is frequent, but cases are also quite common in which the individual remains persistently good or bad for several incarnations. In such cases, incarnation occurs before the opposite type of sanskara has built up a sufficient current of flow to result in its predominance. The beginning of the true existence of the individual self occurs at the moment when consciousness, in the course of its evolution, adopts its first human form. So the word individual self is footnoted, not to be confused with the manifestation of the individual soul, which occurred at the very beginning of the long evolutive process through the various subgaseous, gaseous, stone, metal, vegetable, fish, and animal forms. See God Speaks, Meher Baba. So I'll read that again. The beginning of the true existence of the individual self occurs at the moment when consciousness, in the course of its evolution, adopts its first human form. This also represents the terminal step in its evolutionary development. This is the moment when the limited individuality is crystallized as the I that exhibits the basic characteristics of self-consciousness. This is the true birth of the individual. The true death, one second. The true death of the individual occurs at the moment when he transcends his limited individuality or separative consciousness by being taken up in the truth consciousness of the unlimited and undivided being of God. The true death of individual consists in the complete disappearance of the limiting ego mind that has created the sanskaric veil of ignorance. True death is a far more difficult process than physical death, but when it occurs through the grace of the master, it takes no longer than a twinkling of an eye. This dissolution of the ego mind and the freeing of the soul from the illusion of separative limited individuality are known as liberation. Let me just take a quick look at where we are on time. We're almost out of time. And let me see how many pages are there before I don't think we should try to finish it. Okay. So I think we can actually take a pause here.
Yeah, Baba. I think we see a lot of similarity in the discourses chapters on reincarnation and karma, part 1, part 2, on heaven and hell, and I think about the individual's death. So it kind of complements that to what Ashok also was talking about, the supplement in God Speaks.
Correct.
So it kind of, I think since this was written after discourses, so it gives us a good perspective that when we are reading these chapters, we can cross reference other chapters from other books and get much more perception and understanding. Jai Baba.
Indeed.
Yeah, Jai Baba. I think I found it much easier to understand this time. I think it is written in a much simpler form in this place. And other thing which beautifully came out was the opportunity at death. Starting with a clean slate again. That's something beautiful that I could notice here. Jai Baba.
Yeah.
And also the different classification of death and different suicidal classification also, they give a lot of input for our understanding. So what came to my mind was this farmer's death is a big issue in politics. But what type of suicide is that is very well established here. And what happens to them after the death also is quite clear. So, and also the hunger strike and death, that we never used to think it as a sort of a suicide. But the purpose of that and what happens later for them also is made very clear. And the other aspect is the death in a war. So that highlights that the intention is a political intention or an intention at a higher level or a different level. But you are a cog in the wheel. So your death should not attract the intention. So that is also a good learning from reading this. Jai Baba.
Well said. Well said. All these concepts are new in our journey. That's well said. The classification and types of normal, abnormal death, and the classification of suicide. So, yes, indeed. So, with that, we can draw a close to this week's reading, and look forward to getting together next week. And have a
Jai
great
Baba,
week
I
ahead.
have just one comment.
Sure.
Hello, Jai Baba.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, a comment or question I have for the forum after we've been reading, that it seems like this whole business of life, there are certain laws that you need to understand. You also have to understand the penalties that you might face if you're not following the rules of the game, what I call as the universal laws of nature. So once we start looking at this whole aspect, like a, and because it's only in the waking state, we are in a waking dream, and understanding the laws of matter and laws of spirit is really helping us to navigate ourselves in our daily life. So I just wanted to know what you guys think of this perspective, Jai Baba.
Yes, it's a real awakening for all of us to put at least a few facts of this into our practical daily life. What I feel is that Baba came very late in my life, I think. Otherwise, I would have modified my life still better. Jai Baba.
Talk Mama, you are born in the right place at the right time, and Baba came to you at the right time because everything is
Yes, pre-planned. Okay, thank you.
that. What you just mentioned is your mind. It's your mind that's what is telling you, but you are eternally alive. So just or escape. Jai Baba.
Indeed. So, Jai Baba, everybody. And we can catch up and continue to stay in touch on the group, and look forward to seeing you all next Saturday.
Jai
Thank you.
Baba.
Thank
Jai
you.
Baba.
Jai Baba.
Har Meher
Jai
Baba
Baba.
ki jai.
Ki
Jai.
Jai.
Yeah, you saying something, Mamaji? No, he left.